You guys have been begging for more ranking videos, so you're gonna get more ranking videos. And today we're ranking every single SMG that has ever existed in Fortnite. There have been 29 of them, and coming in at dead last is the Charge SMG. I don't know what they were thinking when they made this one. It works like a normal SMG, except you had to hold down your fire button and charge up the bullets and then release your fire button so that your bullets would shoot. It took forever to charge up, and when you did charge it up all the way, it shot so fast and you used up so much ammo, and the recoil was absolutely insane. At green rarity, it only did 17 damage per bullet, and that's if you actually hit them with the bullets. Overall, the gun was just terrible. In what world would you pump somebody with a shotgun and then want to swap to an SMG that you have to charge up? The next one isn't much better, but most of you never actually used it. This was the SMG pre-season, before Fortnite even had a season. This was the first weapon to officially be vaulted in Fortnite. It did 10, 11, and 12 damage to players depending on the rarity, and only 11 damage to structures. It had a huge bullet spread, and it made it impossible to use on a map as open as Chapter 1. This SMG was just never worth picking up and got quickly vaulted. At number 27, we have the Makeshift SMG and Primal SMG. These two are grouped together because, well, they're just both bad. From Chapter 2 Season 6, the Primal season, you had to use the makeshift weapons to upgrade them into the Primal versions, but there wasn't even a point to waste your time picking up the makeshift. You have to realize that there were normal guns in the loot pool during this time. Nobody wanted to pick up a terrible SMG and then go through the process of finding the parts to upgrade it. At 26, we have the Machine SMG. Now, this one wasn't necessarily bad, but there was just better options like the Twin Mag SMG and the Machine Pistol at the time. It had awful bloom, it was only really viable in close range fights and 50-50s, and the only redeeming quality was its large magazine size, which also became great when Epic slightly buffed the fire rate. But the Twin Mag was available during the season, and it was just so much better than the Machine SMG, so there was no reason to ever pick it up. You'll start to notice that in this list, a lot of these SMGs are ranked poorly based on the loot pool that they were introduced in. Some of them might have been ranked higher if they were introduced in different loot pools, but we got to base them on their time. Like number 25, the Burst SMG. This was originally added in Season 9, and it made no sense to add this to the game when you had the other meta SMGs like the Silence SMG, which was insane, or the P90, aka the Compact SMG. In common rarity, it did have decent damage, doing 20 damage per bullet, and the damage per second was pretty much right down the middle. But the thing about the burst function and the recoil and the bullet spread was that it was way too much of a drawback, especially while hip firing. This just wasn't a very accurate gun and was not reliable in any scenario. Number 24 is the Pump and Dump and the Lawless Blink Pump and Dump. So I can respect the uniqueness of this one. People thought it was going to be very overpowered when they saw somebody using a shotgun and an SMG in both hands at the same time. But the reality is that it just did not work. The shotgun was mid, the SMG was mid, and both together, it was just a mid gun. It felt clunky to use. It was awkward. You couldn't ADS, so it wasn't very accurate, and honestly, just the damage was just underwhelming. The only people who ever actually used this properly were people who were aimbotting. That was the only time I really died to the pump and dump, and it felt like a disadvantage because people who were aimbotting were shooting with the SMG, and their aimbot would immediately pump with the shotgun as soon as your builds broke. At 23, we have the dual micro SMGs. These were introduced into Chapter 5, Season 4, and it was added at an awkward time where a lot of players were flying all over the map. No ADS and a high fire rate pretty much made it impossible to fight for that reason, and the DPS for these were insanely low at just 126 for the common rarity and 182 for the legendary, and pretty much anything under 200 DPS is going to feel kind of low for an SMG. Next up, we have Gwenpool's dual micro SMG, and these had a similar situations to the dual micro SMGs, but this was the mythic version. So they weren't as bad, and they did end up getting nerfed, but before they were nerfed though, this thing had an insane 251 DPS, and it would absolutely shred players only in the close quarters. If it was in any other season, these would have been a great addition and rated much higher, but for that season, they just didn't really work that well. At 20, we have the scoped Burst SMG and the Thorn Scorch Burst SMG. So props to this one. It was actually kind of unique, but the actual execution of it was a little bit confusing because what was the purpose of this weapon? It wasn't really viable in close quarter situations because it had an awkward fire rate due to it having a scope, and whenever it was appropriate for you to scope in with it, you might as well have been using a scoped assault rifle, which were available during this season. Now, the recoil was easy to control on this gun, so if you had some decent aim, you could do some serious damage, but it kind of had an identity crisis. There was just better options in the close range and better options in the long range through assault rifles. At 19, we have the Hyper SMG and Valeria's Hyper SMG. So objectively speaking, this SMG wasn't terrible compared to the others. In a meta with auto shotguns and other clearly better SMGs, this one just wasn't destined to be the back burner. I mean, when you're comparing it to the infinitely better Thunder Burst SMG and the Hyper SMG, it was very mid, and no one was choosing the Hyper over the Thunder Burst during this season. This could have been better if it was added in another season, but honestly, it was just a very mid-tier SMG. At 18, we have the Harbinger SMG and the Hades Harbinger SMG. So similar to what I just said, it was almost necessary to carry an SMG since the Gatekeeper in most cases only had 3 bullets. However, when comparing the Harbinger to the Hyper SMG, the Harbinger was better in every way. The common one did 17 damage per bullet compared to Hyper's 13 damage, and it dealt higher structure damage, higher range, 0 spread, and had much better recoil. Again, the Harbinger and Hyper aren't terrible, but they're also not great. Just very mid SMGs. At 17, we have the CR2 Blaster and the other Star Wars guns. I mean, I almost want to forget these were even in the game, and I want to forget the Star Wars season entirely. The only thing that it really had going for it was the Darth Vader AI voice you could talk to, but the weapons were at least cool looking and sounding, and they did have all unlimited ammo, which made them a bit spammy. But the CR2 Blaster being an SMG weapon from this season, it honestly didn't get that much use because the ARs were just way more accurate and also had a very high fire rate. It was kind of hard to differentiate the guns in the Star Wars season anyways because of all the weird names. And the only reason this gun is ranked higher than the Harbinger and Hyper SMG is honestly only because of the unlimited ammo, and the recoil made it easy to control. Otherwise, the damage was almost the same, and frankly, the structure damage and damage fall off made the gun kind of useless. At 16, we have Gunner Stinger SMG. Normally, when we see a mythic version of a gun, it means it's the better version. However, for some reason, Gunner Stinger SMG, the recoil was ridiculous. It made it worse than the regular legendary Stinger. If you could figure out how to control the recoil, it was a very powerful SMG that did have a ton of DPS potential, but for many players, including myself, the trade-off just wasn't worth it. It was also in the loot pool that had the Combat SMG, which was just better overall. At number 15, we have the Suppressed SMG. This one is just super solid and consistent, and OGs remember that the blue version of this SMG might have been one of the best SMGs we've ever had in Fortnite before they eventually nerfed it. But I'll cover that later on my list. The pressed version had reduced recoil and hipfire spread, but at the cost of lower damage and fire rate. Overall, it was just a very solid and reliable weapon, especially for its time. At 14, we have the Tactical SMG, and any OG watching this will remember how crazy SMGs were in Season 5. Epic kept buffing this thing over and over with increased hipfire, clip size, fire rate, and damage. The TAC SMG would literally shred through players and build, and I'd probably have this SMG higher on this list, but when they unvaulted it in Chapter 2, it came with a lot of nerfs. The most impactful one being the fire rate decreased from 13 to 9, which is huge, which also lowered the green rarity's DPS from 234 to 162, a massive drop. At 13, we have the regular SMG. This was introduced back in Season 5, and it's much better than the pre-season SMG. This is the SMG, and it has bailed so many people out of so many fights. Everything now about this gun just expels mid. It's good at everything, great at nothing. Decent fire rate, damage bloom, everything you'd expect out of a reliable SMG, and honestly hasn't kept up as much with some of the SMGs we've had on this list, which is why it's right around the middle of this list. Next up is the Red Eye SMG. Now, don't get me wrong, this SMG is insane when you're shooting against players. I mean, they just threw a red eye sight on an SMG, which means the range is crazy and there was little to no recoil. But if you're playing build mode, it almost felt like it was healing the builds than damaging them. Essentially, it applies 0 pressure to builds, And if you're only going based off of damage to players, this might even take first, but since we're looking at them overall, I really couldn't place this any higher than this. At 11, we have the Veiled Precision SMG and the Night Rose Veiled Precision SMG. This was a pretty good SMG overall throughout Chapter 6. The stats weren't the best aside from the epic and legendary and mythic versions, but the fact that it had a red dot makes this SMG a lot more viable from long range, and it can be pretty decent up close as well because the hipfire accuracy was pretty good. At 10, we have the Stinger SMG. This thing was a monster when it first came out, and even after the nerf, it was still really good. It was still the reason Fortnite Competitive was so dominated by the SMG meta back in Chapter 3, and undoubtedly the best SMG up to that point. But similar to the Tactical SMG, the Stinger was nerfed beyond repair, which is why it isn't higher on this list. At 9, we have the Eradicator Shadow Precision SMG. Exotics give such a cool twist to the weapons, and this one was great. Everything about this version of the Precision SMG was just that much better, even compared to its mythic rarity. But the reason why it's much higher is because of its special ability. Whenever you hit a player with the Eradicator Shadow SMG, it would reveal their location to you and your teammates, making it perfect for tracking players down after you've hit them. At 8, we have the Rapid Fire SMG. This is one of my favorite SMGs on this list, and I absolutely loved using it back in Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. You had good aim. This thing absolutely shredded players, and if you hit every shot, you could knock someone even if they had full shields. It was also great for destroying builds and applying pressure. One of the few weapons in Fortnite that has a fire rate of over 14, allowing you to bleed 2 bullets every single time someone's wall breaks, making it perfect for people who would like to permanently box in their builds. At 7, we have the Compact SMG, aka P90. This was absolutely broken when it first came out. It was pretty much a minigun that you had to reload. 50 bullets on launch and absolutely shredded through builds. It was really annoying to play against, and it was the most powerful weapon for Season 5. People would just carry around 4 of these instead of carrying shotguns. All you needed was 4 SMGs and minis, and that was good to win the game. At 6, we have the Blue OG Suppressed SMGs. You guys, if you played at this time, you remember how broken this was, and it pretty much got discovered randomly throughout the season. People were picking this up over a legendary Scar, and it was somehow even better than a purple or legendary P90. The reload time on the Blue Suppressed SMG was only 2 seconds, making it extremely fast and really good for applying pressure. So you could literally spray into a player's box, and they had no chance to get their minis off, which was really huge, especially back in OG. Because we only really had minis and slurps and big pops for heals. The damage and fire rate was also fantastic. They eventually nerfed this to the ground, but it was so great during Chapter 1. At number 5, we have the Heisted Run and Gun SMG. This is a exotic version of the P90, and it was introduced in Chapter 4 Season 1. Funny enough, the damage is actually lower on this than the regular P90, but I ranked it higher because of its exotic ability. Whenever you're holding this SMG, it will give your character the slap effect, allowing you to sprint infinitely and faster. The weapon would also auto reload whenever you sprinted, giving you 2 bullets per second. It was very unique and a great way to apply pressure and W key in that chapter. At number 4, we have the Combat SMG. This thing was so broken it could make Tim the Tatman look good. It went through so many updates. The damage to players was initially reduced by 2, and then they had another nerf where the damage was reduced by 1, and then it was buffed by 1 damage, so they went back and forth, but overall it was a lot of fun to use, and the only major drawback was that it had a huge vertical recoil, but due to its larger magazine size and DPS, if you knew how to control the recoil, you could absolutely shred players with this gun. At number 3, we have the Twin Mag SMG. It was kind of a toss-up between the Twin Mag and the Combat SMG for the number 3 spot, but the Twin Mag had a slightly higher fire rate, and the recoil and bloom were easier to work with, way lower than the Combat SMG. But even though the DPS was slightly lower, this gun was a lot more useful for medium to long range and could help you win fights, especially with its fast Twin Mag reload mechanic. At number 2, we have the Heisted Blink Mag SMG. So obviously it's better than the actual Twin Mag because it also gave you the exotic ability to do the dash effect every time you reloaded, which is similar to the dashes you got from the Green Water in Chapter 5. The thing about the Twin Mag is that you could reload fast because it had the Twin Mag mechanic, so you could really use this mobility to move around the map, to jump into players' boxes and just catch people off guard. And now for the number 1 spot. This might not be a surprise, but it is the Chapter 5 Thunder Burst SMG. Who would have thought that a Burst SMG would top this list? because this SMG, even without any attachments, was absolutely insane. And then once you threw on some attachments, it became an absolute machine, especially if you added the laser attachment, giving it zero bloom. I'm talking zero bloom, whether you're jumping through the air, sliding, running, sprinting. There was no bloom on this gun when you applied the laser sight. Pair that with a speed mag to improve reload time, a muzzle brake or suppressor to handle the recoil, and it was absolutely broken. Plus, the third bullet in a burst could go through builds, so you could just keep shooting at people's builds and do damage to them. Almost every single pro was carrying this back in the day. They would not even carry an assault rifle. Just the SMG and a pump shotgun was enough to run through the lobby, and it deserves the #1 spot. Let me know what you guys think about this list, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.